Okay, it's now live.
Thank you, Anna, and good afternoon. I'm Councillor Darren Sanders. I'm a Liberal Democrat councillor for Baffin's, North Milton and South Copner, and I'm also the Cabinet Member for Housing and Preventing Homelessness. The meeting is being broadcasted to enable the press and public to view the meeting. We're meeting virtually in response to the limitations placed on governance by the COVID-19 pandemic. For the purposes of this meeting, the City Solicitor has advised that pursuant to Section 78 of the Coronavirus Act 2020, this meeting will be run by reference to the model standing orders as set out in the local authorities open brackets coronavirus close brackets open brackets flexibility of local authority meetings close brackets regulations 2020 number 392 open brackets the regulations close brackets. Please can members and officers turn their microphones off when not speaking. I'll start by asking Maria Cole to introduce herself.
I can't get the microphone on.
I can hear you, Maria.
Oh, right. It's Maria Cole representing the Residents' Consortium.
Okay, and thank you for coming along, Maria. I'll now ask the opposition spokespeople for housing to introduce themselves, starting with Cal.
Afternoon, everyone. Cal Corkery, one of the councillors for Charles Dickens and the Labour spokesperson for housing.
Okay, thanks for that, Cal. Scott.
Thank you, Councillor Sanders. It's Councillor Scott Pater Harris. I'm the Councillor for Hillsview Ward and also the Conservative spokesperson for housing and preventing homelessness.
Thank you very much, Scott. Please can the officers present now introduce themselves?
Shall I go first, Darren? So good afternoon. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. James Hill, Director of Housing, Neighbourhoods and Building Services.
Good afternoon, everybody. Meredith Hughes, Assistant Director, HMB.
Good afternoon, Jo Bennett, Head of Business Relationships, Growth and Support.
I'll go. I'm Andrew Waggett. I'm the Energy Services Team Manager.
Good afternoon, I'm Susan Whitehouse. I'm Head of Design Services in Housing, Neighbourhood and Buildings.
Good afternoon, I'm Graham Faber. I'm IT Business Partner for Housing, Neighbourhood and Building Services.
Afternoon, I'm Steve Groves. I'm Head of Building Maintenance.
I'm Wayne Layton. I'm a Finance Manager here at Portsmouth City Council.
On mute, Darren.
On mute, Darren.
Thank you for that. Who else has not introduced themselves?
Anna Martin, Democratic Services.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. So you'll have gathered that essentially I've been reading a script so far, but I can now work to the way the agenda works. So I don't have any apologies for absence. Anna, do you?
No, none that I'm aware of.
Okay, that's fine. Two, are there any declarations of interest, friends and colleagues? Cal.
I've got a personal interest in that I'm a council tenant.
No. Okay, Cal, that's absolutely fine. Thank you for doing that. Okay, we'll move to item 3, if we may, which is the improved energy efficiency standards for new build council homes. Because in the first line it says I've asked the design team to do this, I'll give a brief introduction about where I want us to come from and why we're doing this now, and then officer colleagues will then go into more detail. So all councillors voted to put the city into put the council and the city into a climate emergency in 2019. And since then, various bits of the council have been trying to find ways to make sure that can be delivered. It's a tough target, but it's one we have to do because there is no planet B. So one of the ways we can do that is to look to see how buildings can be made more energy efficient. In my own ward, in Baffin's, we've got a social housing development that is highly energy efficient and has been designed that way. We also have Britain's biggest what's called passive house, which is quite an exacting standard for design development, which is the refurbishment of Wilmcote House, which this council has done. So I asked the design team to look and see if which we could have a more formalised approach to building homes and try and make sure that we have homes that are that contribute to our planet's destruction in as little ways as possible. So that's why this paper is here. I've got two authors, which are Susan and Andrew. Whoever wishes to go first, please feel free.
Hello, Darren. Can I jump in? Although I'm here to introduce the report, so my learned friends are here to support me and answer any questions. But
Firstly,
I'll
Meredith, this is not a court of law. They're indeed the Privy Council,
but they are very learned. If I can introduce the report.
Me.
If I can introduce the report, Councillor Sanders, and if there's any specific questions, etc. Thank you for giving the introduction. That saves me, the introduction around the report. I think that the gist of the report really is to set out that our intention is to utilise two housing developments, which are earmarked for Weacock Farm and Stroughton Court, which Joe is going to speak to later in the meeting. And what we're proposing is that we utilise those projects to trial the Passive House standard, but also our own design for social housing requirements that we'd like to add towards the Passive House standard to trial and design and build houses to a very high standard of thermal insulation, etc. What we've done, the report sets out in terms of background, the local context to the energy crisis, and you mentioned that in your introduction. We also talk around the national context in the report, around building regulations, Part L, minimum standards of energy efficiency. We also talk around then the energy efficiency performance standards in section 3.7, 3.8 and 3.9. We give information around in 3.10 how we intend to build the properties, the measures that the design team will instigate in terms of training their own staff, setting up a framework of competent local contractors to build these properties. And I think the key thing that's set out then within the recommendations of the report is that there's three key milestones where we want to report back to you in terms of the evaluation of how we've developed through the design phase of the Passive House developments at Stroughton Court and Weacock Farm, at the end of the construction phase, so practical completion, so when the properties are actually finished and the keys are handed back to us by the contractor, and after a set period of evaluation with the residents in occupation. So we want to engage with residents after they've been living in the property for probably 2 years, so that we'd have had the opportunity to work through 2 years of heating bills, two heating seasons, etc. So it's trying to understand from them what it's like to actually live in one of these passive house properties, but also in terms of cost to themselves, in terms of daily costs of running the building, but also from PCC's own experience of maintaining and servicing these properties, because they are of a higher build standard and a higher quality of technical specification. So we need to understand how we can maintain these going forward. In terms of, we've set our standard very highly in terms of trying to attain the Passive House standard, but also added our own key areas of design around solar PV and battery storage that we'd want to add in. And I think the key thing that we really want to get across at this point in time is that we will design to those standards. but then report back at the end of the design phase to update you and the cabinet, in terms of the housing cabinet, in terms of what standard we can actually achieve per site. So there's no one size fits all in terms of building developments for houses, and we'd want to feed back to you at the end of the design phase to tell you what standard can be achieved in terms of technical specification, and what that will mean then to the residents. At the end of the construction period, which is key milestone 2, we would report back in terms of the quality of the build, in terms of the competence and capacity of the local supply chain to deliver those properties, but our own experience as a design team in managing that build on site, clerk of works involvement, and the specification, and whether there's any necessity to vary the specification as we go through the build. And then obviously I've just mentioned about the post contract involvement with residents, and how they find the building. We need to feed back to you during those evaluation periods, because we have got a pipeline of developments that we want to take forward going in the future, and we want to make sure that we can inform and develop those standards as we proceed through these projects, so that future developments will gain the benefit of our knowledge and learning from these properties. As you said in your introduction, we completed Europe's largest ENERFIT standard energy retrofit at Wilmcote House, and one of the key things, the learning from the evaluation and resident engagement of those properties will obviously stand us in good stead for the works we want to do around these 2 pilot schemes. I think that covers everything, Councillor Sanders. If there's any questions, anything in particular you'd like to ask me or the team, we're more than happy to field any questions. I think you're still in mute, Darren.
Yes, the mute button. Lovely. Right, Maria.
I know this may seem a strange question, but I've not come across this term passive house. Can you just explain to somebody who doesn't know what it is, please?
Of course. Andrew, would you like to take that question from Maria, please?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, hi Maria. Passive house, in its strictest sense of the word of the term, is a very exacting design requirement to get the amount of heating used in a property down, and this is very specific and technical, and I'll explain this, but to 15 kilowatt hours of heating per metre squared per annum. So what that means in practical terms is that the property is extremely airtight, with the air changes within the property being handled by mechanical ventilation, and it's extremely well insulated. And as a result, it really doesn't require any sort of heating input into the property at all. So to give you a practical example of how these are quite often done in projects which have gone before, this isn't necessarily saying that this is how we'll do it here, but in lots of properties like this, you might choose to heat the entire home using just a heated towel rail in the bathroom. That's just to give you an idea of just how thermally efficient the properties are and how well wrapped up they are. There are no cold bridges anywhere within the property, so no areas where there's materials like metal or concrete or anything like that that might transmit heat very quickly out of the building. The glazing is generally triple glazed windows, and the entire sort of heating envelope, so the entire property is just wrapped in a very, very, very energy efficient blanket, if you like. Lots and lots of insulation in the build.
Thank you.
Councillor Sanders, I think you're on mute again.
That'll teach me to stick to the rules that I set at the start of this meeting. Is that okay, Maria? Are there any other questions that you've got at all?
No, that's fine for now.
Okay, thank you very much. Susan, you wanted to chip in? No, you're on mute.
Yes. Oh dear.
You're fine now.
So I just wanted to add to as well to Maria to say that the air quality as well in Passive House is extremely good. So it's a very healthy environment for our residents to be living in, and it's a big step as well towards tackling fuel poverty to be able to build Passive House.
Thank you.
Lovely, excellent. Thank you for that, Maria. Cal, did you have any questions? I should ask.
Yeah, thanks, Darren. I've got one question and then a few comments. So
of course.
The question is, so this report talks to these draft standards being used or piloted on 2 developments. I'm just curious about what are the implications for other developments that are going to be coming along relatively soon, i.e. what standards are they going to be held to?
I'll take. Sorry,
yeah, Meredith.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Sanders. Future developments. The whole reason that we've got the various milestones, Cal, through the life of the project is to make sure that we can inform future development. So the first feedback milestone would be at the end of the design stage. So the learning that we'll get from that will obviously then inform future developments. And the idea being is that because there will be a formalised process that we can feed back to Councillor Sanders in terms of these meetings and the evaluation of how those schemes have got on, we can make sure that if a decision needs to be made around future developments, it can be brought forward and updated through the process of learning from these 2 schemes.
Okay, thanks. I mean, just to quickly come back on that, so the question in my mind is, what happens if we get, and we may well get, another development comes along before any of these 3 key milestones have been achieved? I mean, are we just going to use a completely different set of standards, or are we in practice going to use these anyway?
I think from. Oh, sorry, Joe.
Thanks, Fred. Do you mind if I jump in?
Yeah,
Is that
go on.
helpful?
Yeah.
So Meredith and I plan obviously on a kind of well, at least developments are quite long. So we plan the next 12 months of developments if we're going along, and we've already factored this period into our development planning. So we're just actually moving into our next round of predominantly feasibility work, and then we'll hopefully have the initial designs complete of this design phase to be able to inform where we go next. And we'll obviously engage all of you in those conversations as we go along. Sorry, Meredith, hope you don't mind me jumping in.
No, that's fine, thank you.
Okay, that makes sense. And that's the only question I had, Darren.
Yeah, fine.
Comments, but
No, feel free. And Scott has the same thing, questions and comments, and then I have some at the end.
Okay, sure. So yeah, I think in general this is very much to be welcomed, this report. I know that myself and Councillor Peter Harris have taken the opportunity to meet with officers kind of outside of these meetings to really get to the grips with some of the detail. And I think, to be honest, this is probably some of the most important work that the council's doing at the moment, and going forward clearly is only going to become more and more important as the impacts of the climate crisis becomes more obvious. So yeah, absolutely welcome the report, and I think it's something that we absolutely have to be doing going forwards. I think Passive House, obviously, it's not just council housing, it's all housing and all new development and old developments as well that's going to have to be fit to these standards pretty soon. So it's good to see that the council's kind of taken a proactive approach to this, and hopefully we can lead the way in the city for showing other developers how to build housing to the highest possible environmental standards.
Thanks for that, Cal. Scott, did you have any questions or comments?
It's not so much. I'll go through the paper, Darren, if that's all right. I've got.
Sure, feel free. Yes, feel free.
Which I'm pretty sure Andrew knew that was going to be happening anyway after our briefing, because I thoroughly enjoyed the Passive House briefing. It was very informative, and it's quite exciting to see the council are going down this stretch, to be fair, because I think the way the government have designed their new homes to be built in the future anyway, they're going to be phasing out gas boilers, so it's quite important that as a council we are already ahead of the curve, and it's good to see a report like this. I mean, if you look at 2.3 of the report, it says about a study evaluating the pilot to be brought back for decision. I think that's probably one of the most important parts of the report in a sense of that passive house isn't a rigid model. And we've got 2 different schemes going on in 2 different areas that actually could be booked to 2 different sets of passive house standards. And we can actually find out which one works better for us in certain situations. So I'd be keen to see from what the team 2 years down the line, should we probably say, when this is going to be coming back, what the standards are, where the efficiencies are, and what they've learned, because I think this is going to be a learning experience for everybody, and I mean ourselves included as members. So I mean, over the lifetime of the project, I think it's very important to note that, and I think Meredith and the team have been quite good. I mean, the briefing last week was very, very helpful for that sort of thing. But I think it's going to have to be an ongoing thing. So I think if you guys could feed that back to us as members, I think we would appreciate that. I think it would be an important thing to do. I'm just going to go through another bit on the report. I picked up 3.7.4, which is additional design requirements. I mean, it says obviously it's aimed at purely lowering dwellings' primary energy consumption, which is obviously true. The design standards may, for example, include on-site renewable power, something which is obviously not considered to be passive house. I mean, we spoke about this briefly, Andrew, and you know where I'm going to go with this. I mean, is that including the Tesla Powerwalls and items such as those for renewable energy? Because I know it's an exciting thing for yourself. It's quite exciting for me as well. And to know that we as a council are operating that sort of technology, I think is important for our members and public to know, and the residents as well.
Councillor Peter Harris, if you the additional design requirements are set out within Appendix B of this, and talk at length about particularly the renewable on-site generation. I think I'm just having a quick read now. I think it also includes battery storage within that, which obviously, as you know, covers a bit of a multitude of sins as to what technologies and what have you can fit. But yeah, we've got storage, rooftop on-site generation, which in this sense really means roof-mounted PV. And there's some other opportunities there as well around low carbon heating systems like air source heat pumps and those sorts of things, which will all be sort of teased out in the design of this, and particularly in the kind of mechanical and electrical design of this project.
I think you mentioned about air source heat pumps and a ground source. I think it's going to be interesting to see how we work as an authority in terms of differentiating between the two, because both fit the passive house model but have different methods of working and how they're implemented in the design stage. So I think that would be something that, as an organisation, it'd be interesting to see which one we go for, which works, which more efficient. Are certain locations more efficient than others around the city? Because, as you know, when you, especially the architects and the surveyors in the room will know that sometimes it's not always just about what the building is. It's where the building is in terms of the context of where it is in the city. I think that's quite important. I'm going to just go down to 3.8.4, which again says about meetings have been held with a number of peer local authorities. I think that's really important. I think moving forward, I think we're going to see more local authorities do this around the country. So I think it would be interesting if we could keep reaching out to other local authorities to ensure that, because they might be doing something better than we are, alternatively we could be doing something better than them. So I think if we keep doing that and build up a bit of a network, because I think it goes hand in hand with this local, especially with this sort of development. Sorry, Andrew, if you've got your hand up.
I was just going to make the point that it's very early stages, but we have actually got a sort of working group, early stages, but with Southampton and Hampshire, just as the two big authorities around us, to share sort of best practice, best working on these things. So just, I know that's just the immediate local area, and it doesn't include some of the other people that we've spoken to, like Exeter, who seem to be ahead of the curve on these things. But we are, we're doing that wherever possible.
I was just about to mention the Southwest, because I think the Southwest seems to be where this has really taken off. Probably in the last 5 years, actually, the Southwest is where this has really gone to town. Challenges. I mean, 3.8.6. It says increased capital cost associated with higher standard of building. We know that's a challenge, but I don't know if you could. I mean, this comes down to probably one of you guys can answer this. While it may see an increased cost initially, I mean, over the lifetime of the actual property, I mean, surely it will balance itself out. I mean, is there a case study for that? Are you confident in what I've just said will happen, or is it a bit of a worry that actually down the longer stretch it's going to take longer to pay off?
I think the other thing to add in as well, Scott, is that the more of these builds that we'll do, the more cost effective our design, our build will become. You know, speaking to Exeter, that they've been delivering these sorts of properties for a serious period of time now, and what they're telling us is that there's almost like no difference in terms of cost delivery. So I think it's a combination of both. I think moving forward, if we're building properties with perhaps a reduced number of working parts in terms of heating, controls, things that move, pumps, etc., that might generate some savings. But I think where we'll generate the savings is perhaps twofold: getting a select list, a framework of contractors that can deliver this, but also get contractors that can deliver this on a very cost-effective basis, because they can be delivering it time after time after time. And I think that's the key about getting involved with people like Hampshire and Southampton and perhaps other regional local authorities close to us, because we can share those frameworks and share that knowledge and perhaps share those efficiencies moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Meredith. I mean, that actually does move me on to the inadequate local supply chains and skills to be able to build to such standards on the next page. So it's 3.8.6.3 for anyone that's watching at home and looking at the report at the same time. I don't know if that's actually the case. I think this could be more down to procurement and the way that we procure our contractors and the way that we work, because I think there are contractors out there who could do the work, but it depends whether they would come under our auspice of what we actually do. Do you know what I mean? From a procurement perspective, would they be eligible to actually win the work from us? And I think that's something that we need to look at as well. So potentially with our contractor, and they could obviously subcontract, but I don't know how that stands in the land of procurement, because I actually do believe that the skills are out there to build to such standards already. And I think when it says about inadequate local supply chains, I don't think the supply chains are inadequate. I think the suppliers more so are quite niche still, that they're not producing the products at that such a scale. Whereas let's spin it on its head and say we're going to put an air source heat pump, or say we're going to put a boiler in. A boiler is much more easily accessible than an air source heat pump, and that's just because of the sign of the times. So I think as we move forward, I wouldn't say they're inadequate. I'd say the products are there, but it just takes longer for them to actually be sourced because of where they are, where they're stored, whereas they're not an off-the-shelf product. So that's it. That's a bit of an issue I have with the report, because I think it's just a bit vague. But I say that from a personal and professional point of view. So moving on, and we go to the last part of the report, which I just said. I've already noticed it about 7.2. It says it's going to be an initial outlay. It's going to be more expensive than traditional efficient design. I mean, we know that, and I think the pilot's going to tell us that anyway. I know they understand the reason of the pilot, but the energy consumption is going to be quite important. And I believe that I think Andrew is going to be quite influential moving forward with house building and house design. So it's probably another feather to your bow, Andrew, in terms of your workload. What I would like as well would be I looked at the initial estimates, and I'd like to have a comparison model when we're finished between our appraisal and the actual estimate that's come through, because I think that would be quite good from 7.4. So of the initial financial appraisals are carried out, that pilot developments are going to indicate there could be a financially viable development built to these standards, but that's based on an initial estimate from an estimator. So what I'm asking for basically is, when we have a final cost, can we compare? Because if we're £200,000 in, we're £200,000 out, it just makes life easier to budget, because I think as a council, we effectively have to borrow under a 30-year plan. Sure. And I think it's always good if the accountants know roughly what we're borrowing, and it just makes life easier for us as a council. And I don't want Darren to come back here in 2 years' time and say, we're £400,000 over budget we didn't account for, can I please do this? And we go, oh, actually, that's not a good idea. I'd rather we have that sort of appraisal and we have that set up going forward. So we can roughly know where we're going to be able to cut costs, where we're going to have to increase costs, for example. It's just, I think it's important, Meredith, moving forward. But that's down to you as the surveyor to do that.
No, the feedback on the costs would be part of the evaluation, the feedback that we'd be doing anyway. So it's a key part of making sure that these developments are affordable, within the framework that's available for us.
What I will say, I'm just going to end it on this comment. It's exciting as a council that we are looking to build properties to these standards, but also it's quite eye-opening as a council that we are on a learning journey together and building these homes. And I think we need to be conscious of the fact that we're going to be learning as we go. But the end goal is actually going to be something quite extraordinary. So it's a really positive thing, but I think we should just keep our eyes wide open and move forward at a sensible pace. I don't think we should rush into these, and I think that's what we're doing. So yeah, congratulations to everyone. Good report, and I really look forward to seeing what else we can bring from these. It's really exciting.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Scott. It's very nice to hear such positive comments from a range of people about something, because this is very, very exciting. I think from the point of view of us as an administration, our view is that this should be where possible and where viable. And that links back to the comments that both Cal and Scott have outlined earlier on. Where possible, because we know not all locations are going to work for these sorts of designs. It's just where it is and how it's situated. Where viable, because what we don't want to do is to jeopardise social housing because we didn't quite meet a standard. And that's the lifetime cost. That's not necessarily the upfront cost. That's the lifetime cost, because we know that the greener the home, you can start cutting bills, and that's great for social housing tenants, just as it will be great for people on not much money in the private rented sector. So where possible and where viable is certainly the administration's starting point, but that doesn't mean to say it'll happen all the time. And that's why the other aspects of this package are very good. It's not just design. The ideas around having on-site renewable power in developments, we're seeing things like combined heat and power as well, are also very, very crucial. And I think the various points which colleagues have raised, which I would agree with. I think learning is absolutely crucial. At Copner Green, in my ward, residents tell us that they weren't told how to run their homes to all the energy efficient standards. Strangely, I don't want that to happen again. And I want to make sure that everybody knows how to do it, and that means working with people rather than doing things to people, which has happened too often in development. Also, learning from other authorities. So there are good examples actually across all political parties of authorities where this is being done. The Liberal Democrat Green Coalition in York is undergoing the biggest programme of passive house at the moment. One of the problems they've had is the trade-off between passive house design, green energy, and making the rents affordable. So they've had to cut back on one or two of those. That's a trade-off we want to look at. We know our colleagues in Norwich, our Labour colleagues in Norwich, for instance, have been doing this for a little while, as well as colleagues in Exeter. And they've said, well, OK, we do it with some, but we have to make some private in order to make it all stack up. And so it's how that affects as well. And I know from talking to Conservative colleagues in Havant that they're actually quite excited about this as well, and about what this could do for developments that we'll see in future. So this is really quite exciting and potentially quite revolutionary. But our advantage, which comes back to the contractor's point, is we've done it before, because we do have the Wilmcote House experience. I don't want it to take 4 or 5 years, please, colleagues, but I want to make sure we can learn from that experience, because we have had contractors who've done it before. Whether they can do it again, I don't know. But we do have experience, and this is really, really rather exciting, and one of probably the best things I will agree for a considerable period of time. So I'm grateful to colleagues for all that, and I will agree this report. So Meredith, thank you, Meredith. I'm not agreeing this report. Is that how rehearsals don't work? Meredith. And you're on mute as well.
Apologies, I've pressed the wrong button. I apologise.
Right.
Sorry.
It happened.
I've got nothing further to add.
Oh, okay, all right. Fine. I thought you were going to say that I was talking bilge.
No, sorry.
Not for the first time, but there we are. Okay, that's excellent. So therefore thank you for that, colleagues. So we move on to what can only be described as Weacock Farm. Joe.
Hello, everybody.
Weacock.
Moving on to Weacock Farm. So this report looks to seek approval for a mix of 28 new council housing dwellings within the Weacock Farm estate, and looks to seek approval for a capital spend of £8.1 million to deliver these new council homes, which will be held within the housing revenue account. The recommendations are that the Cabinet Member for Housing and Preventing Homelessness approve housing revenue account capital expenditure of £8.1 million to deliver 28 council housing dwellings. That the Cabinet Member for Housing and Preventing Homelessness note that the capital expenditure of £8.1 million requested for this scheme is based on estimated cost from industry cost analysis of a passive house model. That the Cabinet Member for Housing and Preventing Homelessness note that this development will be a pilot scheme designed and built adopting the principles of the improved energy efficiency standards for new build council homes. A report to this meeting at the completion of the following phases to report on progress and learning. So that's the design phase, the construction phase and the operational phase. The report then seeks delegation for the Director of Housing, Neighbourhood and Buildings in consultation with the Director of Finance and Resources to amend the composition, design standard and spending profile of the proposed scheme in order to meet planning and design requirements, whilst ensuring that the scheme remains financially viable following any necessary changes. That the Cabinet Member for Housing and Preventing Homelessness is delegates to the Director of Housing, Neighbourhoods and Buildings, again in consultation with the Director of Finance and Resources, to apply for any grant funding to support the scheme, and also to agree the use of either grant funding or one-for-one receipts as may be appropriate. To give you some background on this development, the Area Housing Office team have worked to identify potential sites for housing development within their estate, understanding local context and the issues relating to each parcel of land. In November 2019, Steve Wynn, who's the area manager for Weacock Farm, proposed a number of sites, and these were passed to Susan, our in-house design team, for evaluation. A feasibility study has been received with the estimated costs for those sites that can be developed. However, all of the sites are in the attached feasibility study. The new homes will be built on land owned by Portsmouth City Council, although Havant are the planning authority for these sites, and the feasibility study has been carried out to include Havant's requirements. None of the sites listed in the Weacock Farm report are in the Havant Borough Council local plan. Havant Borough Council currently have a target of 504 homes per annum based on central government standard methodology, and this development will continue towards this need. The two authorities will continue to work closely together in their duty to cooperate, both unilaterally and through the Partnership for South Hampshire. We've commenced discussion with Havant Borough Council, who will be expecting a 30% allocation of nomination rights for all developments of more than 10 units. The new properties will meet both Portsmouth and Havant waiting list need, and will include looking at bespoke properties to support those with a particular housing need or who need adapted accommodation. The mix for this site is 8 2-bed 4-person houses, 17 3-bed 6-person houses, and 3 5-bed 8-person houses. I'm not going to talk at length about the improved energy efficiency standards because we've just covered that report, but you'll see at Appendix B the low energy and social housing design requirement report, and as we've stated, these buildings will be built as a pilot of that scheme. We will obviously strive for the highest possible standards as outlined in the report. However, we acknowledge that factors such as orientation, site layout and the cost of the development may all have a differing impact on whether or not the development is financially achievable and able to be certificated as passive house. As we've said, there will be 3 reports used to track the progress of the development and the implementation of the low energy standards. And these reports will come to this meeting and will be presented at the design phase, construction phase and operational phase. The next report at the completion of the design phase will report on the programme for the development as well as the low energy standards which are included within this design. The report then goes on to speak about the corporate priority of making Portsmouth a city that works together to enable communities to thrive, and we feel that this is still important given that the tenants of these properties will be Portsmouth tenants, and that the development helps to increase the overall number of properties within the HRA. There's an impact statement attached, and legal comment is that the recommendations made are within the power of the Cabinet Member for the Housing to adopt. I'm going to pass to my finance colleague, if you don't mind, in order that Wayne can present his comments.
Were those your comments, Wayne? Joe, I think we might return to Wayne in a bit, but
Okay.
I'm assuming silence.
Oh, he's here. I think he's here. Are you there, Wayne?
Sorry, I couldn't turn off my mute button, and now my camera doesn't work, so I'm not sure what's happening with Teams, so apologies. You can either see me or hear me.
We can hear you.
I haven't really got much to add other than, as Joe said, it's an estimated build cost using passive house standards based on an estimate at the moment of 8.1 million. In order to make this viable, we will have to apply for Homes England Affordable Homes Grant, and the viability appraisal has used affordable rent levels in order to be able to prove viability. And as Joe's mentioned, and as Councillor Scott Pater Harris sort of requested, we're going to be coming back with a revised financial appraisal once we know more and we've gone through the tender process. And that was it from me.
Is that it from the officer side of things?
Yes.
Lovely. Okay, thank you for that. Cal, you can please go first this time.
Thank you, Darren. I haven't got any questions as such, just got a few comments to make. I think this is another report to be welcomed. I know that we've had quite detailed discussions in the briefing, so we've hammered out a lot of the questions that I had. I think, yeah, it's definitely to be welcomed. It's always a good thing to see council housing being built on council lands so that more local people have the ability to live in affordable and decent quality housing. So it's certainly to be welcomed from that perspective. I think it's worth kind of touching on the principle of estate infill, which essentially is what we're doing here, kind of finding gaps on our housing estates where new housing could be built. Now, clearly, this is a complex issue. It won't always be appropriate to infill particular gaps that we've got, and there'll be good reasons why particular sites won't be suitable. And clearly, I say that as a ward councillor for an area which is predominantly council housing estates, and has seen infill over the years, and may well see more infill going forwards. So I think it's just worth kind of noting that point, that where it is done right, and I think what's being proposed today is a good example of it. It can make a positive contribution to the local community. However, we of course need to be aware that actually quite often these estates are densely populated already, and there always needs to be that consideration of the local kind of services and resources to facilitate new people living in that area. So yeah, on the whole, very happy to welcome the report and thank everyone that's been involved in putting it together.
Thank you for that, Cal. Scott.
Thank you, Darren. It's it's a very good report, and I think I noticed this when we spoke about it in the briefing. It's not what you'd see a normal development look like in terms of the infilling. I think Cal's made a great example of that. So it's quite interesting to see what the council's doing, utilising the space in Havant, but also utilising space that's already effectively part of a community, which is quite nice. So we've got residents that are actually going to go somewhere. Instead of it being all brand new for everyone, they've actually got people there that have been there a long time, that know the area. So we aren't just putting residents in an empty space, which I think is quite a nice thing to do. Actually, it fosters a sense of community that's already there, and they can join. So that's brilliant. It's a pretty good report, to be fair. I think we went through it quite intensely during the briefing, actually, and we had a few things changed on it, which Wayne did allude to, which I appreciate, actually, Wayne. So thank you. Just a quick one, and it's more of a question for Joe. Obviously the site's not in the local plan. I've mentioned it before, and it doesn't seem to be an issue. But can you just clarify that, so for everyone that's watching at home and enjoying this episode of Housing Portfolio Meeting?
So during the local plan site analysis and identification, we work very closely with Havant. As you'll see in the timeline, you'll see when these sites were identified and how, and so they simply weren't included in that piece of work. We have, however, discussed them with our Havant colleagues, and will continue to do so. And I imagine as we move forward with this type of work, we may see things that we didn't previously consider to be a development site become one. And I think the point that Councillor Corkery made is the most relevant, in that we balance the additional development with community improvements, which we've tried to do here.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right there, Joe. I think balancing the sense of community is important, and I think that's what you've achieved. And I think that's from the outset of picking this site for that reason. So it's quite keen to see. I mean, the other thing I was going to look at is 3.6, which is about the allocation of 30% to Havant. I mean, obviously, you can clarify this very quickly for me. That comes to 8.4. So do they get eight homes basically for them to use, or do they get an allocation of 8.4 and we make up the 0.6 somewhere else?
What we'll be doing is discussing sites as a whole, so that we can work out the best things for all of us, and also We want to give our colleagues in Havant the opportunity to talk about what's important to them. So it's very simple for me to give an allocation of units. It's much more powerful to ask what they need.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to be doing. And that obviously may change the numbers and layouts depending on the build cost of those units. So I would want to give you that information at the design report stage and say that at this point it isn't a fixed discussion.
No, I think that's quite good to have. Funny enough, it comes back onto 3.9, which I talk about flexibility. That does sense around flexibility. I think it's very sensible from the report aspect that you've given yourself flexibility within the report. I think 3.9 and 3.10 are really examples of that. So the report's giving yourself flexibility to where if you need to change things, you can, which I think actually we need to do more of. I think as a council, I think we're too rigid in some of our decision making, and I think more stuff like this would actually help us make better informed decisions. So that's brilliant, Joe, and I'm really keen to obviously see how this develops, and that brings me on to 7.1, which obviously, as I said, this is going to be reviewed as we go through the design and build process. I'm really keen to see how we review this and how it's presented to us as members, because I think that's going to be the key to getting not saying our buy-in, because I think we are bought into the process already, but to be really sure that it's going to work 100%. 7.2 states to obviously the design to be as much as 8.1 million. I notice it says 8.1 as much as 8.1 million. It doesn't say possibly of 8.1 or more. So I think Wayne's obviously built in that 8.1 is the top level of where we seem to be going to. Can you just clarify that is the case, Wayne?
Can I just come back on the point you made first, if you don't mind, the one about the design report? I think we benefit in this work massively by using our in-house expertise, and the fact that we, as we've just called upon, we are learning together. So I'll be taking on this journey with our colleagues as much as you will. So it will be interesting for me to know how we can best represent this information. But obviously with the help of Susan and Andrew and Redis team, we will be able to understand this work and potentially also talk about it in bite-sized chunks. But it gives us the real benefit of having colleagues actually be the people who are helping us work our way through this. So I think that we can expect a quite significant level of detail and good understanding from the work, and I think that we're benefiting from that resource. No. Sorry, I'll leave you to your finance comment now.
No, it's all right. I mean, I'll just finish on that, Joe. I think you're right. I think it is a learning experience for everyone, and I think the fact that obviously yourself and more members of your team are going to get involved, I think is really important for us as a council to really spread the knowledge on this, because moving forward, this is probably what house building is going to look like across, not just in the public sector, but in the private sector as well. So, Cal alluded to it earlier, the fact that everyone needs to be building houses. I don't think that's going to be very, very far away, in my opinion, and with the way the world is going. So, yeah, I think you're right, Joe, and I think this could give us a bit of a foot in the camp already, sort of thing. But yeah, that's really fun. Anyway, on to Wayne about the 8.1 million. I think he says as much as 8.1 million. I'm just guessing that the 8.1 million is the top figure.
Yes, it is.
Brilliant. Then on to 7.3, Wayne. It says about the 840,000 from Homes England grant funding. I'm guessing that if it's not funded from Homes England, it'll be added to the unsupported borrowing cost.
What I said in the comments was that we'll have to check to see whether it's still viable. Because borrowing the money, it might not be a viable scheme without the grant.
Okay, so basically you're not sure if it, without the Homes England grant, whether it becomes viable. So that money is quite important.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. That's fine. And obviously, I'm going to ask this one now because this is about using affordable rent levels. I think that's quite important, Wayne. And just out of interest, did you cost it at social rent level as well?
Yes, and it was unviable as a 100% socially rented product.
What was the difference in cost, Wayne?
I can't remember off the top of my head. Sorry, I don't have that in front of me.
Would you mind if I jumped in? Would you mind quickly? I'm sorry, but I just wanted to point out that the reason that we've pitched this as we have and not had the usual conversation is because we're trying to ensure that we have the most capacity we have to reach Passive House. And at the moment, we will come back at the design stage, let you know what's included, let you know how much it costs. We've based this information, as I said in the report, on industry estimates rather than fully worked up designs. And I think as we come into the next few months, we'll know a lot more. And we can then have a much more detailed discussion about how much it's costing, etc. We have had to base this on industry estimates rather than our usual experience, which is what we're usually basing our estimates on. And that's and so it's something that I just want to kind of hold our powder dry on until we've got a lot more information. And I think we can have a really quality discussion about the costs. I just think it's for the completion of the design phase.
I could have a really good quality discussion about the costs now, to be fair, and knowing what goes into building these properties. So I'm quite easy on that factor. No, it's more so the reason I asked about the difference between affordable and social is because obviously Wayne says that makes it completely unviable, and I just want to know what the difference is. I mean, because we're saying 8.1 million at affordable, the Homes England grant makes it viable. I'd like to know, are we talking millions of pounds, or is it a couple of £1 million? I don't know. So if Wayne could give me that information outside the meeting, I'd be quite happy to. And I'm sure Councillor Corkery would like that information as well, because I think it's good to know why it's at affordable rent levels. I mean, it's okay saying they've been calculated using rent at affordable levels, but why? What's the difference? You know, because this is the sort of thing that residents are going to ask. Why are we doing it at that level? Why can't you do it at this level? And for our own peace of mind as well, I think as we should all look at all avenues and potentially put that information out there. But I mean, I bow to the finance gods at that one. But I'm finished. So sorry for me to rabbiting on. I won't do so much in the next report because it covers pretty much the same stuff.
No, that's all right. And for those people who are watching and may not know, what happens is there's a two-stage process to the decision making. The first one is a briefing meeting where Cal, Scott, me and the officers run through reports, and that's an opportunity to look through clarifications and things like that and comments as well before it comes to a decision-making meeting. Many of the things that are said in the briefing meetings are repeated in the decision-making meeting, so it's not done behind closed doors. But it just helps to actually generate better policies by just encouraging people to actually have a more open and honest discussion, which I think can only improve policies going forwards. Maria.
Right, well, I do think it's good that we're planning to build new houses, whatever type they are, even this passive model. I would be interested to know, though, are any of the houses going to be suitable for disabled people? And I am really pleased that we actually work alongside Havant and we're not competing with them, because I think the more councils can show good practice and work alongside each other, because we're not in a race. We keep being told this on the television. We're not in the sprint, we're in the marathon or something. But yeah, I think it's good that we can work with people rather than competing with them. And disabled people, that's what I'm particularly interested in.
Maria, we do every build look at our housing waiting list to understand what the most difficult need is to meet. And so I can't give you that exact information yet because we don't have it, but I think it's highly likely that we would have a number of adapted properties.
Thank you.
Okay, is that your questions, Maria?
Yeah.
Okay, good. That's one of mine. That's one of mine. I don't have to ask that, so I'm happy. A few observations, if I may. The first one is that backlot development is always very controversial. We've had a development in Goldsmith Avenue that I think colleagues from all groups on the planning committee took a running jump from last week, and that may be the right thing to do, but it shows how sensitive backlot development is, and that's why it's important to be sensitive about this, and I think this report does do that. I'm delighted about the stuff around wheelchairs as well. I think the other point around flexibility is also crucial, and this comes back to the trade-offs which I mentioned earlier on. My instructions to officers, well, I don't do instructions, but my gentle requests to officers are basically that the rents have to be as low as possible and the houses have to be as green as possible. How we get there, don't mind, but we've got to make sure it's right. It's not a case of, charging people rents because they're we can. I want to make them as low as possible. But that particularly with passive house coming in, that now does create a trade-off, which, as I've said, other councils, particularly York, for instance, are looking at quite strongly. And I think that's why this coming back and saying, actually, what does it look like? What are the trade-offs we're going to have to make? Because I think there will be some uncomfortable decisions, and I'm sure if people think I make the wrong ones, I'm going to be told off. But it's going to be important, and we've got to understand these trade-offs, because there are going to be more homes like this going forwards. We have to build homes in this city. We have to buy homes in this city if we're going to cut our waiting list. I'm delighted that we've got a plan. and particularly under the duty to cooperate as well, which is a planning thing, which says we've got a chance to work with haven't. I think that's really, really helpful because particularly Portsmouth is just struggling to find places at the moment. And by working with haven't, that will actually help us hopefully ease off Scott talked about the finance gods, the planning gods, who occasionally, like Thor, strike vengeance down on people and not give local people enough control. Here endeth the rant. Thank you very much, colleagues. I look forward to this coming back. Oh, and by the way, I've also said to officers that all costs that come here are ceilings as opposed to floors. I do not want to come back and ask for more money because I may get no. So we want to try and make sure there is a ceiling so that we can drive down the costs whilst having the trade-offs. But on that basis, I'm happy to proceed. Excellent, Joe. Thank you very much. The next bit is Stroughton Court, or the Lee Park bus turning circle for the number 23, as it's now called.
I'm glad that you remembered the number because I'd forgotten it. This report seeks to ask approval for a mix of 63 new council housing dwellings within the Stroughton Court area of Havant, and to seek a capital expenditure of £18.7 million to achieve this. So the recommendations are that the Cabinet Member for Housing and Preventing Homelessness approve Housing Revenue Account capital expenditure of £18.7 million to deliver 63 new council housing dwellings. That the Cabinet Member for Housing and Preventing Homelessness note the capital expenditure of £18.7 million requested for this scheme is based on estimated costs for an industry cost analysis of the passive house model. That the Cabinet Member notes that this development is a pilot scheme designed adopting the principles of the previously discussed improved energy efficiency standards, and that there will be three reports coming back to subsequent meetings to work through the design phase, construction phase and operational phase of this development. That the Cabinet Member delegate authority to the Director of Housing, Neighbourhoods and Buildings in consultation with the Director of Finance to amend the composition, design standards, spending profile of the scheme in order to meet planning and design requirements, whilst ensuring that the scheme remains financially viable following any necessary changes. That the Cabinet Member for Housing and Preventing Homelessness delegates to the Director of Housing and Neighbourhoods and Buildings in consultation with the Director of Finance to apply for grant funding to support this scheme, and also to agree the use of grant funding or one-for-one receipts to support. This scheme is slightly different to the one before in that it is in the local plan, which I'll come on to. But I think it's fair to say in background that there has been a desire to regenerate this area for quite some time. Part of the reason that hasn't happened is it's not the easiest of areas to develop in, and whilst we've done some development in local green spaces in the Giant Footsteps Park, we now want to move on to looking at the local centre in Stroughton Court, which includes a row of shops, which has a post office, convenience store, Chinese takeaway, early years setting. There's a really natural footfall that goes through this area, and there are some environmental improvements that we can make to really make that work as well. With that in mind, in June, I passed this work to our colleagues in the internal in-house team with Susan, and asked them to evaluate the scheme. We had not been able to achieve what I wanted to, and what this has given us is something that really pulls together the development, really looks at the overall area, and gives us a really nice number of units, but without overcrowding the environment. So these properties will be built on open space that's owned by Portsmouth City Council. As I say, Havant at the planning authority, and they have this scheme within their local plan. Sorry, excuse me a moment.
Are you okay?
Not dead yet. Should be fine. Sorry, apologies.
Okay. No. Take your time. No one's going to die in this meeting. Okay.
I shall endeavour not to. I promise you. The Havant Borough Council currently need a target of 504 homes per annum based on central government methodology, and this development will contribute to that. The two authorities will be working together closely under their duty to cooperate, and as part of the Partnership for South Hampshire. We've commenced discussions, as I said in the previous report, and are expecting that Havant will receive nomination rights to 30% of the properties in developments of over 10 units. The properties will meet demand for both Portsmouth and Havant waiting lists and will include looking at bespoke properties to support those with an adapted need. The proposed mix for this development is 10 one-bed, two-person flats, 22 bed, four-person flats, 25 three-bed, six-person houses, and 8 four-bed, eight-person houses. The improved energy efficiency standard for new council homes, also presented at today's meeting, will be used to design the energy standards, and you'll see at Appendix B, the low energy and social housing design step requirements document. We'll strive for the highest possible standards as outlined in the report. However, factors will need to be taken into consideration, those that I covered in the previous presentation. There will be 3 reports coming forward, the same as those in the previous. I don't want to keep repeating myself because I think you might get bored of me. Nothing remains to be spoken about except for me to pass to my finance colleague, Wayne, if you wouldn't mind.
Yep. So we've carried out a financial appraisal using cost ceiling of 18.7 million using Passive House standards. In order for this to be viable, we need to apply for £1.89 million worth of affordable homes grant, and that's when we use affordable rent levels as our income stream in order to be able to make it viable. And that's it.
Nothing.
Okay, Wayne. Thanks. Right. I think that's done. Scott.
Thank you, Darren. It's just that I've got just a couple of questions. Obviously, 3.6, it's about it being in a local plan. Joe, they've got 55 units in their local plan. We're offering to deliver an extra 8. I'm sure they're not going to complain about the extra 8. They're going to gleefully take them.
We have a slightly enlarged red line to this than we had in the previous discussions with them, so that's where the additional units come through. But I feel confident that we can explain that we're not overcrowding the piece of land.
No, that's fine. I imagine that you'd obviously already seen that one off quite quickly. So it's actually quite good, the fact that they've planned for 55 and we can deliver an extra 8 homes. So shows that we're doing something right. Also, just a quick one. Actually, it's going to lead on to what Maria said, and I'm sorry, Maria, I'm going to steal your question about, are we going to plan for any disabled adapted homes in that area?
So this one, we've already started to look at this detail, so I can answer it a bit more clearly than I did with the Wecock Farm one. We definitely are looking at the ground floor flats in the block being adapted as a starter, but also you'll notice the particularly large houses that we're building, and that's come from a design requirement that we're actually looking at within the waiting list at the moment. So with this build, I can say most certainly, yes, that is what we're endeavouring to do. Okay.
No, I understand that probably has a slight additional cost element to it, which but the benefit completely outweighs the cost for building those sorts of homes. So actually, that's a really positive note to actually end my questions on. So thank you for that, Joe. And I think it's really important that we are building homes for all the community.
Thank you.
That's good. I don't think it's just Maria's question. It's on my list as well to ask. Maria.
No, I've got nothing more to add to the report or anything. It's just good to see more houses being sorted out because we need them, definitely.
That's lovely. Thank you very much. Cal.
Thank you, Darren. Yeah, kind of echo what I said earlier, really, about it being a good thing to see council houses being built on council land. And I think, as far as we can tell at this stage, the development being proposed seems to be sympathetic to what's already in the area and should make a positive contribution, in fact. Just a query on something we have previously discussed, but I just wanted to follow up with a further question, and that's with regards to the retail units that are currently there. And my understanding is that the proposal is to remove some of those retail units. Now, I guess the question I've got is, are we sure that's the right thing to do in terms of removing potential employment space or community facilities from an area that, definitely in terms of employment space, hasn't got a massive amount of it? I understand there's potentially public space improvements to be made, but yeah, that's just the question I'd put. And also, a second part of that, are there any implications in terms of planning policy for loss of employment space?
Thank you. In answer to your question, are we sure that it's definitely the right thing to do at this point? No. What we do have is the knowledge that there is an issue with the public realm, and we also know that we have some vacant shop unit that's been vacant for a considerable period of time. And so it may be that we can bring forward a change that improves the public realm and brings the parking closer to the local centre and make some improvements. If we had a viable business need there, we wouldn't want to remove an amenity. The purpose is to improve the local centre and to make it more convenient for people. So we absolutely will need to balance those things as we come through the design work, and that consultation with local people and understanding what they need from their local centre will be key in understanding how we move forward. We know that the existing facilities there that are operating are really well used, but we also know that we've got a vacancy. And that we haven't been able to fill it. So within planning terms, were we, I think the easiest thing for me to say is, were we to approach Havant saying that we wanted to remove a retail unit, I'd need to have really good evidence as to why I wanted to do that. And accordingly, I would be coming back to you in the design meeting with that information as well. But basically what we will need to do is to weigh the factors of community consultation, what's important to the local community and what is actually viable in that location, as well as taking account of probably going into more detail on crime statistics, the environmental impact, etc., of the existing layout and taking that from there. So it most definitely isn't a foregone conclusion. It's included in the feasibility because it would definitely be an improvement to the public realm, but that does have to be balanced, as you say, against those other things.
Okay, thanks, Joe.
Okay, thanks for that, Cal. I've got a couple of questions and then a few comments. So coming back to the Affordable Homes Grant, because that's applied to both Stroud and Weacock, and I think also when we were talking about Cabbage Field Road previously, and it keeps coming up. Wayne, could you explain what that grant is, who does it, and what the constraints on it are? And if you don't know, say so.
We apply for it through Homes England. We can get between sort of £35,000 to £30,000 per unit. It's designed as kind of gap funding, so you can only get it if you've got a scheme which is actually unviable, and it gets you over the finish line. They've recently just relaunched a new round of funding, so it's live now. So we're in a good position to keep moving forward, get a planning permission, and then we can apply for the fund.
Is one of the sorry, Wayne, I was interrupting you. I shouldn't.
That's right, and we've been successful in the past in securing this type of funding. So,
but is the Affordable Homes Grant on the basis that you deliver an affordable rent? Affordable social rent product.
Yeah. That's right, but it would be the same if we were doing a socially rented product as well. So it's for social housing, regardless of what tenure it is.
Okay, so the grant is not necessarily a barrier to charge cheaper rents?
No.
Okay. All right, that's helpful, because it did come across a little bit as if it thought it was, but I think that's very helpful going forwards. So, Joe, the trees and the open space.
Yes.
I'm loath to knock trees down unless they're dead. So what is the situation with trees and open space here? I want to come back to Cal's point about the shop in a second, but what's the issue around trees and open space here?
So the key here is to look at, and with any development, honestly, is to look at the trees in detail. We talk a lot about not wanting to remove trees, but there are trees, shrubs and other, well, we have Susan on the call, so I probably shouldn't talk badly about plants, but we have some plants of lower quality. And sometimes it can actually be really important to take those out and to allow for better planting and to have trees of better quality within a development. We do obviously, though, have to provide arboricultural reports that look at trees that we want to remove, that look at TPOs. No one here is going to want to take out a beautiful old oak tree. It categorically is not up our street, and you've seen in future developments us work hard to amend developments to ensure that we can keep quality trees. So our work here will be through our in-house team again. Obviously, that links in particularly with this development to the landscape architects. Susan, you're very welcome to say something if you'd like to. And what that allows us to do is to really look at the quality of the environment that we leave behind, and to think about how the walkways, the trees, the planting, and the entire community come together better as a whole. Go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, I would just like to say, yes, the landscape architects work really closely with our architects and have already sort of well embedded within this scheme. They've been out there and had a look. We will get our arboriculturist advice as well, but we would never want to be taking out healthy trees where possible. But as Joe rightly said, sometimes things need to be rejuvenated, in fact, and we would be keen to make sure that you know this is not just a new building scheme, but it's also, you know, is also an improvement to the landscape and the general environment of the area. So we'll be looking at all of these as part of the overall scheme.
Yeah, because sorry, Joe.
I was just going to say as well that I think that we'll need to be working with our colleagues from Havant, because they'll have those questions and those concerns, and that will be what Susan and her team do in terms of ensuring that they have the right balance there.
Yeah.
And we have worked with them on a few schemes recently as well, so we've got quite a good working relationship with them.
Okay. Now I'm sure I'll have the Portsmouth Council leader in my ear when it comes to trees, because I know we both agree that St James's, if you replace trees, you need to do it with things that are better and mature, which would be my starting point in all this, I would say. So this shop, have we had any takers for this shop over the last 5 years?
I can't remember the timeline, Councillor Sanders. It has been a significant period. There have been a couple of false starts as well, unfortunately, where businesses have hoped to be able to take the unit and then not been able to for economic reasons. But they have been over a period of years.
Because I think the starting point of all of us will be to protect employment space, and I know that Havant is very keen to protect the 23 Memorial bus turning circle because it's the terminus of the route, I understand. But we need to make sure if we can maintain employment space where possible. But there are times if there aren't any takers. You know, we've got a shop. We've actually got a housing-owned shop in this city that doesn't have any electrics, which is mildly impressive for me, I have to say. So you know, we want to make sure the shops are viable. If they're not viable, that's pointless. That's my view. But I think it comes back to the previous point around flexibility.
And as I say, we will obviously work with colleagues in Havant, who are the local authority, to ensure that we cover everything that we need to.
No, I think that's helpful. And also it's around what Havant's approach to employment spaces. We're very protective of employment space in Portsmouth. Havant may not be. I don't know. But aside from that, I think we can proceed, colleagues. So thank you very much, Joe. And thank you very much, Susan. Right. The spending budget, as it might be described. The capital budget, what we're going to spend trying to improve people's lives. Part 1. Meredith.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Sanders. You just switch that off. So a bit of background on this item then. The revised housing investment programme was approved at the last full council on the 9th of February. And in addition to that, the Council House repairs and maintenance budget for 2020, 21 and 21-22 were approved at your last Housing Cabinet decision meeting at the end of January, 25th of January. What you've got in front of you is the annual report for Council House maintenance improvements and Council IT business software for 21-22. It sets out our capital and revenue spends across the geographical housing areas. It gives you clarity around the budget spends and what properties we'll be working on and plan to be working on the next year and year afters. It also includes our intended IT capital spend, and we've got Graham with us today, and Graham, I'll introduce Graham and he can talk through the capital IT bits after I've covered off the key areas of the report. In terms of the recommendations, so the recommendations are that the area programmes and allocation of finances is noted, the capital budget, capital budgets listed in the appendices, that's both repairs and maintenance and the capital IT, be approved, and the Director of Housing, Neighbourhood and Buildings be authorised to proceed with the schemes, and the Director of Finance's global appraisal be approved as well. In terms of we've got a number of appendices, and we've in Appendix D we've got the what we call our budget book, which is our intended spend for next year. Gives lists of schemes that will either be on site, which will either be tendered, or will be in stages of development, evaluation, etc. I think a couple of key areas of note within the report and the appendices, obviously continued significant investment in our housing stock, both on Portsea Island, in Paulsgrove and in Lee Park. Steve's on the call and has got an item to follow, but one of the key things is that there's over £3.5 million earmarked next year for works around our fire safety programme, and Steve's going to talk a bit more detail about that in the next item. We've got with the roadmap set out in terms of the Prime Minister's roadmap in terms of perhaps returning to more traditional ways of working after the end of June. We've got the opportunity to relaunch our sprinkler installation programme, and that's articulated within the report. We've also we've been talking around the green agenda as part of some of the earlier items, and there's a significant investment, again over £1 million earmarked for next year around LED lighting upgrades across the estate, both in community areas and staircase, hallways, etc., but also continued expansion of our solar PV and battery storage portfolio as well. And obviously around that as well, there's significant fabric improvements to improve levels of thermal insulation and properties as well. I've got Graham, who's our IT business partner, is on the call, and I wonder, Graham, if you wanted to highlight your key areas that you wanted to discuss in your appendix.
Indeed, yes. Hello, everyone. So the IT Capital Scheme covers a number of areas this year. The first bit, I think, which is going to be quite obvious, and over the past year or so, we spent a lot of our time delivering laptops and other technology to staff to enable them to work from home in a safe manner. Obviously, fingers crossed, we should be getting back to a different way of working again in the next few months. People starting to come back into offices if it's safe to do so. So we need to consider how we can do that to allow people with their new laptops, etc., to work seamlessly. So I've put in here some effort to actually configure the desk space with the type of accessories that laptops need, for example, docking stations and headsets, etc. We're also going to be looking at a number of other bits. We've got, I think I mentioned last year, but this year we're going to be replacing public access PCs around community centres, youth centres, libraries, etc. And from an HRA perspective, we'll need to be looking at replacing those in the youth and community centres, as well as the resident participation centres. So this will be effort to swap out those desktop PCs with more fit-for-purpose Windows 10 machines. Now, we're in a situation whereby we've had to deploy a lot of laptops this year, but what we want to do is to use those desktop PCs that we'll be giving up instead to use them in the public access space. So whereas we've spent money on buying the laptops in for staff, we'll be able to reuse their existing devices for the public, which seems to make sense all around. We'll also be trying to redeploy some of those desktops that are no longer required into some other areas, for example, within CCTV. And talking of CCTV, we'll also be doing a review this year to look at how it's functioning overall and how we can make improvements, looking at sort of medium to longer term, where we store the data, etc. Is it completely fit for purpose everywhere? And there's a couple of other pieces I've listed on here as well, increasing our count of body cameras for our antisocial behaviour teams and the enforcement teams, for only when they're really required, but they're a useful tool to have to protect our officers. One other thing I've mentioned here is replacing the large-scale printers called plotters, which we use by our surveyors and design teams, etc. We've got some very old ones at the minute, which will need swapping out to work properly with Windows 10. So we're going to do a review of that as well, taking into account, of course, the fact that we're perhaps not going to have as many people in the offices we were expecting previously. So you might have to come up with some sort of clever design for that. On the software front, the key bit of work will be around continuing to develop our housing stock and repair system, which is key to a lot of our work within the Directorate. We'll be doing work this year around improving security and improving GDPR compliance. And on top of that, we'll be finishing off the work around electronic document management system, moving away from paper-based records into a more digital era, which really supports those staff who are working from home anyway, giving them access to all the key bits of information they need about tenants, leaseholders, etc. That work's been going on for a year or so now, putting the key product in place. And over the following year, we'll now be configuring that for our housing officers to use. That's most of the paper, I think.
Okay, thank you for that, Graham. Maria, did you have any comments on this at all?
No, it's rather difficult to comment anyway because I don't actually have any of the reports.
Ah.
All I've been given are the agendas.
Ah.
I haven't had a single report, but listening to Graham, what he said makes quite a bit of sense, hopefully.
That's good to hear, Maria.
Yeah, it just seemed a shame that I loaned a laptop from the council and had it for 10 years and then they snatched it away from me and I had to go out and buy one. I think
I think there's a whole raft of issues there that we can deal with offline, but if you do get some reports, then feel free to sort of ask the officers on behalf of the consortium, ASCN consortium members. Can't vouch for the laptop, not me, Gov. I think on that one. Cal.
Thank you, Darren. Yeah, it's good to see the list of works that are being proposed. As I'm sure you can imagine, a big bulk of the casework that I receive relates to perceived disrepair and kind of lack of investment in council blocks around Charles Dickens Ward, but also around the city. And I appreciate there's only a limited amount of resource to invest at any one period in time, so it's about kind of prioritising the things that are most urgently in need of work. And it's good to see a few of those that I've raised kind of over the last year or two included in this round. I do think there's a question going forward about how, I think on the whole, residents' experience of council services are that they're responsive and that repairs are done when they're reported. But I think there's a question about longer term plans maintenance. And there have been occasions where I've come across casework and it's been reported through and the response has been, well, that can't be repaired under a responsive repair. It would have to go on to the kind of planned maintenance schedule, which in effect often seems to mean that it's kind of years down the road. So just saying I'd flag and something that kind of comes across my desk from time to time. But on the whole, obviously, I appreciate that the budgets are what they are, and actually they're probably quite a lot less because the government has forced councils to reduce rents year on year over a period of time, although obviously this year they've been able to go up again. If that hadn't been the case, then I think we all know there'd be more money in the annual budget in order to invest in maintenance and repairs. So yeah, on the whole, I'm happy kind of to support the report as it stands and thank those involved in putting it together.
Thanks, Kel. I think the finance god wants to have a chat. Wayne?
Yeah, just to say the capital budget is based on our depreciation charge, so it's not actually linked to the amount of rent we receive. So it's something which we put into the major repairs reserve, and it's a ring-fenced budget.
Okay. Cal, you wanted to come back?
Yeah, I mean, so would it not have been the case that if we'd been able to, or if you'd chosen to increase rents over that period, that money could have been spent on repairs and maintenance?
We'd have a larger reserve, a larger housing revenue account reserve, but the capital budget is set on the depreciation charge, which is appropriated to the major repairs reserve each year. And it's ring fenced and it can only be used for capital works or repaying debt.
So are you effectively saying that, Wayne, that essentially the rents go on the revenue and the capital goes on the capital?
Yeah, if we defer the rents up, the amount that gets appropriated in the major repairs reserve will be exactly the same as it was now. But you could theoretically, if you had a bigger reserve, you could put, I suppose you could put more of a surplus into the reserve. But we're not. I just wanted to make the point that it's the depreciation charge, not the rent income, which sets the capital budget.
Cal, did you have any more points at all?
No, I just.
You're not agreeing with the sausage of that, are you?
Well, I think.
No.
Wayne,
right, okay.
That we could transfer money across if there was more money in the budget. I mean, I don't see, if you had an additional X million, surely you could choose to spend more on that, on maintaining blocks, if that was what you chose to do as a political priority. But we can disagree on that particular point if you like.
Wayne?
No, Councillor Corky's right. You could make the decision. So yes, the principle is correct. I yield.
Okay, thank you. That might be one for the future. I mean, we've seen a lot of revenue budgets going on capital, which is what we do across the authority. And then I've seen the other way round, which is capital money going on revenue, which I'm told is a bad thing in my old days in local government. But thank you for that. And I want to come back to the depreciation charge because I think that's quite important. Was that your questioning, Cal?
Yeah, thank you.
Okie doke, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, I wanted to come back because I think that the substance of the point you were making, which is, look, there's other things that are out there, is important. And I think one of the things I'm keen on doing is actually having a real look at this depreciation charge, because this is a real potential issue going forwards. And we want to try and make sure that we can actually cut that as much as we can. And that's one of the things I've asked officers to do, partly because it affects this. To be honest, I would agree with you, Cal, about the government reduction rent levels of 1% for 3 years, which has divvied us out of 5, 6, 7 million quid from my poor memory, which is money that could have been spent on improving council homes. And I think that was a real shame. And I'm delighted that the government has reversed this. The only other point I would have, Graham, and just a question, is what are we going to do with all the old stuff? Are we going to recycle it? Are we going to reuse it somewhere else?
The old IT kit?
Yes.
Yes, so we have a duty to dispose of that equipment responsibly. It's not the sort of kit that we want to reuse anyway because it's so old now. Obviously, we wouldn't want people using insecure equipment. So we have, as part of our corporate contracts, we have a company that will recycle that for us on our behalf. But we will, of course, be reusing the good equipment within the organisation where we can replace them with laptops.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think the principles of reduce, reuse, recycle are important across everything we do in this. And I was delighted last summer that the council actually ripped up the centralised supply chains in which much of the public sector was operating. And actually, by decentralising that, we actually got more laptops out, which enabled more people to work from home faster. Which I think was a real accomplishment on that. But I do want to come back to the thank you for that, Graham. I think this is really good. I'm certainly keen that we do tackle the depreciation charge because I think that cost is much greater than the few £1 million we've lost from rents over the last few years, and we do need to tackle that. So on that basis, I'm happy to approve that, so we can now get cracking, which is good news. Scott, did you have a point? You were raising your pen, or was he just raising a pen by accident?
You didn't even ask me about any comments, Darren.
Didn't I?
No.
Right. Okay. Forget that final decision.
It's fine. It's
Scott. No. That's not fair. And I forgot. Okay. So there's no political hiding behind it. Did you have any questions or comments, Councillor Peter Harris?
I only had one, and it was just more so on the budget and talking about the sprinklers budget. And I think it's a really benign point, but I noticed that obviously certain blocks have been prioritised over others over the period, and I just want to know how you've come to that decision to do it in that manner.
And can we actually move that towards the discussion on the next?
Well, no, it's in this item, Darren. It's in this item.
know, and it's also on the next item.
But I'd rather cover it now because then it will pick up on my question for the next item.
Does this mean the meeting can finish earlier? Because it's now 1 minute past 6.
Yeah, otherwise, I'm going to ask it again in a minute.
You are going to ask it again in a minute. Okay. On the grounds that we can get out of here before midnight, Steve, what's the prioritisation for? Actually, could you cover the sprinklers, the fire doors, and the external panels as well, which is the formation of the next report? Because it's all three together.
Save me asking the question in a minute.
That's okay. I don't want to ask questions twice. It is still 1 minute past 6, which is good news. Steve.
You're on mute, Steve.
After that, he's silent. He's stunned.
Sorry.
Steve.
As regards to the prioritisation for the sprinkler programme, there are certain categories that we apply to all the blocks that we got where we're planning to do sprinklers, and the priorities work on the basis of the tallest blocks for very obvious reasons. Blocks that have got a single staircase, so for escape routes. So some blocks have 2, but the ones that have got 1 would be prioritised over the ones that have got 2. We always also look at the inhabitants within those blocks. So if we've got blocks that have got sheltered occupants, supported living occupants, then they would be a higher priority. And then the sort of lower down the priority is if the blocks have got gas in them or not. But the main priorities are the tallest blocks and single staircases, followed by the type of residents that are actually in the building.
That's all I needed to know.
That's all right, and I apologise, Scott. I mean, that makes me almost sound like an authoritarian, which I try and avoid being.
I was going to ask some question on the software, but I think Graham's pretty much covered why we.
Sure?
Well, I think I mean, I only noticed it because I was a bit sad when I read the governance and audit report as well regarding the GDPR breaches that we've had recently. And I think there's only two in the actual directorate, and they were both been dealt with by a process issue. So. I think upgrading the software is quite important, and it seems like we're trying to cut that sort of thing out to make the service more efficient. So it was just more of an in-depth discussion about the software itself, but I can have that offline with you, Graham, if that's all right.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine, of course.
Okay, that's excellent. Apologies for that, Scott. I will now kick myself for the rest of the meeting, which is fine. So on that basis, again, I'm happy to approve this particular budget. Thank you very much. Now we can get working. Okay, and now... which Scott has very kindly sort of given us a preview on, we have the fire safety report, which is one I've asked for. So I'll explain why I've asked for it, and then Steve and Meredith can put it forward. So essentially, this is just around making blocks safe and just trying to be open with people around what blocks go where and the sort of processes we're doing to actually make sure blocks stay safe. Fires, particularly since the horror of the Grenfell Tower. Disaster is an understatement of it, really. We have to put safety first, and we're prepared to do that as an authority. And this is basically the next stage of it. And just to put it all out in the open and to be open and honest about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and where it's going. I would say that my mother lives in one of the blocks that is on the timetable. So, Steve, fire away, Squire.
Okay, so thank you, Councillor Sanders. So this is a summary report of fire safety improvement programme and investment that is planned on the council-owned HRA blocks of flats over the next few years. Provides an update on work that has already been agreed and also new work that is planned, and notes the impact of the pandemic on those programmes that were previously agreed, and their current progress. Within the report, there are details of the sprinkler retrofit programme, fire door replacement programme, and external panel replacement programme, not just for this year, but over the next sort of 5 years, to give a bit of context of the direction where we're going. But the report also talks about the fire strategy that sort of underpins the plan work that we're doing, as well as how we're planning to use the programme to engage with our residents. If we can move on to the fire strategy, what underpins this work is the fire risk assessments that we're undertaking to all of our blocks of flats. These are sort of type 1 non-destructive surveys, so they're not intrusive initially, but the recommendations from those fire risk assessments could lead to further more intrusive surveys and testing of certain items. The risk assessments are an overall assessment of the potential risk of the block, and out of that fire risk assessment, it will give various recommendations, if necessary, regarding perhaps repairs that need to be undertaken or management actions to manage the blocks more effectively to reduce the risk of fire in those blocks. As I said, the fire risk assessment could also lead to more intrusive inspections of the blocks by specialists such as fire engineers. The council has 753 HRA blocks of 5 stories and below, and 41 blocks that are 6 stories and above. And currently we have no outstanding fire risk assessments that are due for review or to be retaken. The strategy for our properties is that all properties have a mains operated smoke detector in the property, and that is checked on an annual basis to make sure that it's working and in date, because all smoke detectors have a manufacturer expiry date. The blocks are inspected throughout the year by our estate services team, and we've also got we've got a number of safety groups I talked about at the December meeting, cabinet meeting, such as a fire safety and high-rise building safety group that meets quarterly to discuss policy improvements, actions, or learning from fires that have undertaken on the estate, so that we can sort of be more directed at what sort of work that we actually need to do. We also meet regularly throughout the year with Hampshire Fire and Rescue to share information, organise joint inspections of blocks, facilitate training exercises, and do community engagement. And I think that's quite an important point to note, that we work very closely, have an excellent working relationship with Hampshire Fire, and that has sort of underpinned the work that we do, and we've sort of shared these programmes and the prioritisation of the blocks with the Hampshire Fire, and they're fully supportive of the work that we're actually doing. As I sort of touched on the previous item, the blocks are prioritised, so that we're trying to do with this programme over the next 5 years is to prioritise where the biggest need is, but also to make sure that we're coordinating the works for the different work types to make sure that we are causing the least amount of disturbance to the residents. So we don't want to have a number of contracts on the same block at the same time. So we're trying to organise them in a logical manner, but also have one eye on prioritising the work to make sure that blocks remain safe. If I move onto the sprinkler programme, so that was due to commence this financial year. However, the impact of the lockdown meant that we deferred the start of the programme, because that would have involved getting access to it, not only every property, but also into every room in every property to install sprinklers. So we deferred it to start this year. But in the background, so that programme is a commitment really over the next 5 years to spend £9.5 million on retrofitting our high-rise blocks of flats. As we talked about in the last item, we've prioritised those blocks for sprinklers based on height of the building, escape staircases, and the type of residents that are living in the blocks. And that is a prioritisation that is similar to the advice from Hampshire Fire. So their guidance and position statement on sprinklers that they've published is along the same sort of lines, where they talk about the same sort of criteria to prioritise the blocks when installing sprinkler systems. The sprinklers that go into the properties would be fairly concealed behind bulkheads, so and to minimise runs as much as possible, so they're not too intrusive in terms of the look and feel in those properties, and installations can take a few days to actually undertake. Sprinkler protection is provided to all the parts of the properties, but there are certain exemptions, so they wouldn't have sprinklers in the communal areas, for instance, unless there was a particular fire risk assessed risk in those areas, and that's because those areas should be fairly sterile in terms of potential fire. And in terms of the procurement of this work, we have been, although we hadn't started the programme, we have been working on establishing the commencing the procurement, and that is out to tender at the moment to set up a framework for contractors, and we hope to have the first projects on site by the autumn of this year. Moving on to the fire door replacement programme, again, that was due to commence this year. But that.
Steve, you've run into some IT problems, so we've not been able to hear everything.
Have you got?
So we got as far as I think fire doors. I think.
Yeah. Okay, that's okay. So fire door programme, that was sort of deferred for similar reasons as the sprinkler programme, in as much as access was potentially going to be an issue. And the investment in that programme is £10 million over the next 5 years. And the strategy is really just to focus on fire doors that have definitely got the correct certification. And we're in the process of discussions with procurement about the different options for establishing, again, a similar framework of preferred suppliers for the fire doors. Moving on to the external panel replacement. So this came about where our fire risk assessments were starting to take into account the external of the blocks. This wasn't necessarily a requirement for the fire risk assessments, but the fire safety bill that I talked about at the last meeting has extended the scope of fire risk assessments to include the external elements of the building. So we were already starting to undertake that this year. And then what we've done is we've identified a few blocks that have got panels. Typically, these are panels that are underneath windows that need to be replaced. And again, we've been working, that work has already been tendered. Tenders were returned before Christmas, and we're scheduled to commence the first site in April this year. In terms of resident engagement, I think this is a really positive programme of works, and we fully intend to use the programme to work with residents to promote and re-engage with residents fire safety on the estate. I think that's going to be really important, and we're already in discussions with Hampshire Fire about how we can work together in terms of doing community events to promote fire safety and use it as that opportunity. Residents will be engaged as we progress through the different programmes, and not only just with letters, but we will, where applicable, we will be having open day events and utilising vacant flats as pilots, so that we can sort of demonstrate to our residents exactly what the impact in their individual property is going to be, because we found that a very effective way of engaging with residents when we did the Wilmcote House project. Nothing beats being able to actually see where those pipe runs are going to be and what the sprinklers are going to look like in their own individual property. And also we're going to work with Hampshire Fire. They've got access to, for instance, on the sprinkler programme, they've got access to a practical demonstration unit. So again, we can set up as part of the engagement various events around the blocks when we come to that stage, where we can demonstrate how the sprinklers work and how effective they actually would be. And then alongside that as well, as I reported at the December Cabinet meeting, we're also in discussions with the Housing Resident Consortium about how we can extend our current reporting on compliance, including fire safety, so that we can get residents more involved in all aspects about fire safety and how they can keep safe in their properties. That's the end of the report, Councillor Sanders. If there's any questions.
Okay, that's great, Steve. Thank you very much, Cal.
Thanks, Steve. Just a quick query in terms of the timeline of works that are being planned. Obviously, particularly in relation to the fire doors and the sprinklers, there's quite a lot of overlap there. And I just wonder whether it's been looked at whether those works can be done kind of at the same time in those blocks in order to minimise disruption and potentially also kind of increase efficiency.
So the reason there's different reasons why some of those schemes it's not practical to take place at the same time. Partly because of the access into the properties is crucial. for the sprinkler scheme. So the pipe work would run communally, but then we need to look at the routes that go into the properties. And with the fire door work, the issue that we have to address as part of doing that work is where telecommunication companies have run cables already into those properties, and we need to possibly divert some of those cable runs, particularly where they go through door openings. So there's a bit of enabling works that we need to do on that program as well. So we are looking at so for instance, the schemes that we're doing early doors for the fire door program are schemes that we know where we haven't got so much of those sort of issues, and that gives us time as part of the sprinkler program to get ahead of the game to make sure that they're ready for the fire door replacement scheme.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I thought it would probably been looked at, but I thought it was worth mentioning. Is anything that can be done to kind of reduce disruption, I guess, to residents?
Yeah. I think the other point, sorry, Councillor Corkery, is as well that the frameworks for the different elements of work will be with different specialist types of contractors. So obviously, you know, if it doesn't mix to put them all into one contract, because you probably wouldn't get people going for those contracts. So it's better to have a sprinkler specific project that's got sprinkler specialists. They're not subcontracting to somebody else. In the same way, it's better to have a door replacement contractor who's not subcontracting to another contractor for that type of work. So that's another rationale why we wanted to keep them separate. And obviously you couldn't have two different contractors working in the project in a block at the same time.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I think on the whole, clearly is another report to be welcomed. Anything that's going to increase the level of fire safety and reduce risk is something that, again, is to be welcomed, but it's something that we need to do. I think it's shocking, really, to be honest, that we're still in a position where we have the option to do this. Clearly, we're making a choice as a local authority to allocate money to do this, but I think that probably all building owners of high-rise should be required to retrofit sprinklers. I know they are new builds, but that retrofit legislation hasn't been put in place. I'm sure, and I know from speaking to residents in lots of these blocks, again, this is something that particularly affects Charles Dickens Ward. I think all of the blocks that are against sprinklers, apart from the ones in the car park in Estella and Grafton Street and Tipton and Edgbaston, all the other blocks fall within Charles Dickens, I believe. And this is something, yeah, we've had lots of engagement over the years about fire safety, and there are real anxieties after Grenfell from some people living in these blocks. So anything that can be done to increase the safety of the people living there, and also hopefully put people's minds at rest that they are safe in their homes, is something very much to be welcomed. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Cal. Scott, do you have any other questions than the ones you asked previously?
Yeah, no, just a couple of bits that Steve brought up. I think if you go to, sorry, Steve, bear with me a second. I think it's more so, you mentioned about 3.21 in the report, 3.2 actually in the report, about the non-destructive surveys at the beginning of the processes. So you say obviously it's not an invasive one. So what if the findings of that report become not what you would like, and you'd go to the next stage? When does it become an invasive survey?
No, when so for instance, when it's really if when they're doing the non-invasive one, they can't answer the questions about the risk. So that's when it would go. So it's not that they've necessarily found a problem; it's the fact that they can't categorically say yes, that it's safe, or there may be issues. So that's when they would go for an intrusive. So the areas that typically where we end up doing more intrusive surveys are where there's fire stopping and such like, where they would want to satisfy themselves that there's been an actual intrusive survey. So that's when they will recommend that we get an intrusive survey undertaken. So most of the time we are doing, in most of those blocks, we are doing elements of intrusive surveys, even though the actual original FRA is non-intrusive.
Okay, it's just I'm just interested in it because I know that these things, by doing this process, we can find other things that are potentially wrong with the buildings. And I don't want to go down the discussion of Horatio in Leamington, which I'm pretty sure we've all heard a lot about, but I think that was basically from more investigation. So it's really quite actually enlightening to see that we're doing this already. And I think we're basically learning from previous, and it's good to see that this sort of stuff's being implemented and there's a process in place, because we don't want another scenario like that again, quite frankly. But it's a very good report. I think it's nice to see that you guys are prioritising in a very simple way. I think you outlined that on the last report, which was great. So I commend you for this, Steve, as always. I mean, it's very thorough report, and I think you should be really proud of it.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Scott. Finally, Maria.
No, I was going to ask a question about the sprinkler systems, but I think it's actually been answered now, because I have had a couple of friends from Handsworth House asking me, when's it going to start? When's it going to start? And I told them it will start when they're ready to start, and they'll let you know. So other than that, no, I've got nothing else to say about it.
That's kind, Maria. You can flog them a timetable now.
Right.
And I think it's important that we actually have an indicative timetable of when things can start, so that people can know, which is very, very helpful. I'm also delighted they're actually doing something ahead of the fire safety bill, which is coming up. I agree with Cal. This should have been done years ago, frankly. All of this stuff, but it's good that we're actually getting this going now. Keeping residents safe is the first priority of a landlord, and that's what we've had to do. Scott has kindly mentioned Leamington and Horatia houses, for which I'm more than happy to talk till the cows come home. But I think we've had hours of that discussion over the last couple of years with that. But it is crucial for us to make sure that we actually get things right first time. And I think our Conservative colleagues were right to take the cladding off of those two buildings when they did. That was work that was ahead of much of the country, and that was the right thing to do. But it did lead to other things that cropped up. And we've got to try and make sure that can all happen. So just to, there's no decision here. So just to be clear, because I know we've got procedural people who will no doubt complain. When I've said proceed previously, that has meant proceed with the recommendations as per the paper. So they're not changed in any way, shape or form. Just so you know that. So it is now 23 minutes past 6. Before I formally close, this is the final meeting of what has been a slightly longer municipal cycle than any of us were expecting. We've had a virus in the way, and that has changed a lot of things. It's meant that we, across the council, we've not been able to do the things we should have done a year ago. In this, it's maybe sprinklers, maybe bike hangers, it may be other stuff. But it has got in the way. And that's something that has been difficult. But I would like to thank the entire officer corps and also Maria, Scott and Cal for their patience and sympathy and occasional suggestions. Over the last 2 years, we have changed people's lives through the work we've done on homelessness, and we're in a miles better place than we were before. All the things that were dreamed of are now real, which is truly remarkable in many ways. And I'm delighted that we've kept going in the way that we have, and we've still got void properties coming through. We're building council homes, we're buying council homes, which I think we all would agree on. We may disagree sometimes around aspects of policy, and that's only fair given our slightly different political viewpoints, I think, between Scott, Cal and me. But I think that what we've emerged with is actually very, very good and something to be proud of. And at the end of that homily, at 24 minutes past 6, that is the meeting over. Anna, thank you.
Shall I turn the live stream off now?
Please do.
Right, you'll still be audible for a couple of minutes.
That's fine. There will be no swearing here. Well, I won't swear anyway. I can't speak for anyone else.